I'm first of all, I'm going to get the name right. Coalition Purple this week.
Yeah,
So
there you go.
no,
Hurdle one crossed.
yeah, right. Oh man, the brain is a scary place at times. I've
Oh yeah.
decided. So, anyways, as is the world of politics. So what's going on your way?
Not a whole lot, just pretty status quo these days, working on stuff, building a building for my wife in the backyard and, keeping everything running. So all pretty good.
Yep, yep. So the past week's been again a kind of an interesting, world in terms of the politics. Two things that just kind of came to mind that all happened in the last week or so that just kind of keeps reminding me about how to try and break through to both Republicans and Democrats,
Yeah.
because I think both of us agree that you don't necessarily have to give up your party affiliation, at least for now, just to be thinking differently and thinking independently. And two things kind of reminded me of that this week. One was with this latest school shooting
Mm.
on kind of the conservative side, because that's where it tends to happen. It's like, the comeback always is well, we need to really focus on mental health, and that's how we're going to solve this problem, kind of stuff. And it's like, well, number one, you have to fund that kind of thing, so
Yeah.
rarely has that been top of the list for people to fund. But it's like, also, it's like, when are we going to just use a little bit of common sense here? It's kind of like saying, well, if we just focus on mental health, we won't have people driving drunk anymore. It's like, well, we do have laws to that,
Right.
that's why we have things like drunk is identified as 0.8% alcohol and all that kind of stuff, right? So it's like, where's the logic in some of this stuff? And then the flip side of it is here in California, the bill that went through that's hasn't been signed yet by the governor, but basically suggests that undocumented immigrants will be allowed to start applying for this program that could give them $25,000 down payment to buy a house. And I'm
Yeah.
going, okay, well, there's a gazillion people that can't afford it that are either documented or
Yep.
actually citizens already.
Putting aside the fact that California doesn't remotely have the money to subsidize any of
And
this.
it's like, even though you manage to pass that bill, at least in the legislature, what kind of message does that send? Just in terms of it's just nonsensical. And
Yeah.
so, that's kind of more on the progressive side. It's like, why, and that's where all the people in the middle need to just really kind of get together. You don't necessarily have to leave the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. You just got to tell people to stop this
Yeah.
kind of crazy stuff until a real legitimate third party gets started. And those two just hit me, because they all happened the last week or so. And it's like, it really comes down to just, come on, people, let's get some
Yeah.
common
Seriously.
sense going.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'll try and comment on all of that stuff in some senses. First of all, with the school shooting, I never like to talk too much about things that I'm not super, well appraised on the facts. And this
Right.
is still, we're still learning to see what
Yeah.
was actually going on here. But having said that, as far as the mental health aspect and, the way this, seems to happen a lot in schools, we spend so much money on education in this country. I mean, if you look at the per capita spending per student, in the United States, it's much greater than it is, say, in Japan. And Japan gets much better results.
Right.
So I just feel like one of the things that we could be doing with all that money we spending is really have developmental and mental health programs within the schools. So you really have people there that are interested in the lives of the students, how the students are doing, how they're faring in school. And there's sort of a sense that a lot of people just sort of get passed along, like social promotion, I guess maybe you'd call it, where,
Right.
maybe you have students that are struggling, or you see kids that, don't have a lot of friends or not adapting well or have other behaviors. But, the school is such a machine these days that it's not really looking at these kids and, seeing what their needs really are. And I
Right.
can speak to that a little bit from personal experience as someone who was dyslexic, especially at a time when the understanding of learning disabilities and dyslexia, weren't really that well understood, and they weren't really not really worked on, in schools very much. So in my experience with schools, the counseling that I got when I was young was, and of course, 50s. So I mean, I'm way out of date with this one, but I'm just saying from personal experience,
Right.
the first thing they always told me was I just needed to try harder, and I was like,
Right.
I'm trying pretty hard.
Yeah.
And then at one point, they decided that I needed to be in the I'm not even sure what the correct PC way to describe this would be, but in the slow learning classes.
Right.
And so they put me in that class for a while. But the interestingly enough, the person who taught that class and who was actually aware of learning problems as opposed to the rest of the school said that I wasn't appropriate for that, and kicked me back into the regular classes. But I mean, I basically just got passed along, until I was in college. So uh, I can, I wasn't a school shooter, but I can
Right.
identify with the fact that the school has spent a lot of time and money on various things, but I don't feel that they're putting a lot of money and effort into actual good mental health care for students, especially students that have difficulty. So that's one thing that I would say is that should be a real priority and it should be funded, even at the expense of other
Right.
within the school. And then the other thing about the housing stuff and the cost of it, I was gonna just sort of connect that to one of the things that's really been concerning me and affects me personally, and that's the insurance costs in California.
It's crazy.
So one of the things that affects the cost of insurance is the cost of whatever it is that you're going to insure. So you come along and you say, okay, well, we're going to give a whole bunch of people a whole bunch of money to buy a whole bunch of houses. And so people raise the cost of houses, which puts more cost in everyone's pocket. But what that also means is that when you go to buy insurance, instead of buying insurance on a $100,000 house, you're buying insurance on a $125,000 house, which means your monthly payments are more. So you shoehorn somebody into a loan so that they can get the house. But then because you've raised the expense of everything that's associated with owning property, the people can't afford to keep the house. I mean,
Right.
it's like a replay of the housing bubble situation that we saw in the early 2000s that led to the recession in the first place. So I
Right.
mean, we're treading down the same path, doing the same stupid things, and it's gonna eventually have the same effect, and it's gonna be a huge calamitous, recession that comes along because you're just inflating everything with this funny money,
Right.
and it's going to doom us all. And as I say, we're already seeing it in the reflected in the insurance markets with the inflation that's gone on in the past few years. The cost of insurance is just becoming outrageous, and because no one can afford the cost of insurance, the insurance companies are leaving places like California. So it it's soon going to be impossible to even get insurance in California. I've had to change my business insurance every year for the past 3 years.
Oh, I know. Yeah. No, it has. It's been really crazy, and even on this isn't even isolated to California. I mean, there's a lot of states like Florida and other places that are kind of going through the same thing for different reasons in some regards. In the case of Florida, it's like, well, you're having a lot of natural disasters, so
Yeah.
that but but in California, yeah, with the same thing. I mean, even with car insurance, I think ours went up last year like 35% or something. It was crazy.
And it's supposed to go
And
up another 50% in California.
yeah, and it's like,
It's
come
unaffordable.
on. Yeah, yeah. And the company we're with, they've already put in for, yeah, somewhere around 35-40%
Hmm.
proposal increase for next year
Yep.
for homeowners insurance. And it's like, yeah, I mean, I know we've had a few problems around, but not, part of it is the inflationary part of it. But they're kind of saying, well, it's kind of the, fear of the fires and all this stuff. And it's like, Well, that's absolutely a problem, but those are actually, when you look at the size of this state, it's a fairly isolated incident. I'm not saying it
Right.
doesn't impact a lot of people. It's kind of like, mass shootings. Well, they are terrible, absolutely. But when you look at the actual numbers, that's pretty low down on the list of how people die
Right.
when it comes to guns, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of people dying of guns, but it's not usually mass shootings. And so it's like, so all this stuff again, it comes back to where the people in the middle, I think, need to start demanding just a little more common sense approach to some of these things that, because we're gonna price ourselves out of wherever we're living. I
Yeah.
mean, this isn't, again, California is probably leads the pack in many ways in many different areas, but it's
Mhm.
happening, all over the place.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
not just California.
as they say, the if you look at an actuarial table for how insurance works, because it's all just basically numbers,
Yeah.
one of the big parts of the actuarial table is going to be replacement cost. So as everything gets more expensive,
Yep.
I mean that's exactly, but then because when you think about it, that's really what insurance is. You total your car. What's the cost to replace your car? Well, if
Yep.
the cost to replace the car goes way up, then the insurers are going to charge you more for insurance. I mean, it's just sort of
Yeah.
the way that it is. And as the cost of everything goes up, maintenance, replacement costs, just anything you can think of. Well, I mean, the cost to cover that or replace it, whatever it is going to be more, and therefore insurance goes up and up and up and up and up. And I
Yeah.
mean, regardless of what reasons you're thinking, you can't. I mean, at one point, in the inflation rate for one of the quarters in the not too distant past was something like 9%.
Yeah.
That's
Right. That's
that's a
not
disaster.
sustainable. Right. Right.
Yeah, and as I say, and I think that like so many things with those kind of like economic numbers, you kind of start to see the results of them maybe a year later or a quarter or two later when
At a
because
minimum.
you start it's like the old boulder rolling down the hill kind of thing, it just gathers speed. And so it's like as one thing gets more expensive, that drives up the cost of the next thing, which drives up the cost of the next thing, which drives up the cost of the next thing. So it takes a while for it all to sort of like come together and really start to show the big problem. But I think it's now starting, and I think the insurance industry is one of those places that's it's really going to show up because
Yeah.
insurance prices are just going to be absolutely just brutal in the next few years.
Oh yeah. No, it is. It's already started. And well, I wanted to circle back around on the mental health stuff in the schools because and hearing your story about it, just again, it kind of goes back where it's just sort of this mind shift. I think so many of us, I'm sure I'm guilty of it too, of the importance of being proactive about solving these things versus reactive because
Yeah,
it's we're kind of going through that. Our grandson is on the spectrum at the very far end. He's very, but he's got some learning disabilities and challenges, and he's up in Washington State. And they've actually been real so far, knock on wood. They've actually been great. They're putting him in some special programs to focus on his speech
yeah,
issues and they're still trying to figure out exactly what it is, but something not is not quite connecting in his brain or whatever. He's smart and he's got great abilities, but just not verbalizing real well yet.
yeah,
And but it's focusing on those, particularly those first few years, especially where get it right.
yeah,
Spend the time, invest the money, and don't move them along. And help them get set for success. And we're kind of in this roughly the same generation. You're still young compared to me, um,
I'm not sure
but
I'm young by any definition at this point, but I'll take it.
but uh, but back in our day, there just really wasn't anything. I think it is changing a little bit,
Yeah,
but to the extent that it really needs to be, I'm kind of we're seeing it firsthand right now that um, even with our grandson's situation, he's still in a class of 18 kindergartners, right?
hmm
And they have two people in there, and they're doing what they can, But I mean, some of these kids really need some heavy duty, highly focused attention that you try and spread that across 18 kids, it's going to be tough, you know? And
Yeah.
they're also motivated by the system to move them along. And it's like, fortunately, we know some other people in the education world, and they're helping us in terms of, hey, you don't have to move them along, and you need to, be your own best advocate. And, if he needs to stay back another year to get what he needs to really get up to speed, they can't say no, basically,
Right.
you know? And
Yeah. But I would sort of like add a little bit to that because I think that over the years, they've gotten better at identifying sort of the mental issues that affect learning. So
yes,
if I were in school now, they would probably identify me much more quickly
yes,
as someone with dyslexia, and they would get me some sort of assistance that would help me sort of make the educational milestones that I should be making. But what I don't think that they do is I don't think they look at socialization. I mean, to
right. No,
take, I
you're right.
mean,
That's
when you look at
different
how,
animal.
right, so the kids that do the school shooting, I mean, they almost always come back with like a similar profile. They're unhappy. They're acting out. They maybe they don't have a lot of friends. You know, they're not socializing in a way that the rest of the classrooms are. They're ostracized. They're picked on. They're bullied. They're various things like that. And I think that if we really want to think about what we should do about school shootings is we need to have people in place and not just maybe one person per school, like a team of
Yes,
people
yes,
that go out and actively interact with the students, and or have enough training to gauge when you come up to somebody and say, "Hey, how's it going? How are you doing?" I mean, you liking school here? You loving it? This is great. You're killing it. Everything's good, and not just one student, every student, all the time, rotating through. Hey, this. How are you doing? This looks good. Do you have problems? Why don't you come talk to me? Because like again, I'll just put it from personal experience. And again, I know that my personal experience, isn't necessarily relatable to anything. But as I struggled more and more with the learning disability as I was younger, I isolated myself intentionally more and more. Like, for
sure,
instance, I never wanted to be called on when I was in class. Like, if
right.
somebody said, read this passage from this book, and you're in the fourth grade and you can't read a word, I don't want
Right.
to get called on to have to do that. So I sunk away for a long time. Because as I say, I didn't really figure out like what was going on with me until after I graduated from college. And I know if I could go through this whole story, it's insane how I actually even managed to get through college and stuff. It's a mess. And maybe someday I'll talk about it because it might be good for people to hear.
Yeah.
But basically, there were parts of the way that I socialized and my parents sent me to private school because I wasn't doing well in public school. And then once I went to private school, I didn't know anyone and I didn't really care and I didn't want to be there and I blah, blah, blah. So there was a lot of things that if someone had approached me and been like, hey, what's going on with you? And where I was really lucky was that I played a lot of sports. So I wasn't just interacting with teachers in a classroom and maybe not doing well when you're in a sport, especially like for me, it was basketball, which is a relatively small team. You talk to your coaches every day, and they
Right.
ask you how you're doing. Hey, why you didn't have your head in the game. What's going on? What's this? What's that? And so the advocate in high school for me, the one that really helped me the most was an assistant basketball coach. And
Yep.
now that I look back over the years, I owe him. I mean, I owe him
Right.
big because he saved me because he
Yep.
was the only person who really advocated for me, who really looked out for me, who really
Yeah.
once in a while asked me what the hell's going on. And I obviously didn't want to talk to him because nobody knew what was going on with me at that time. But again, if you have somebody, let's just say they're on some kind of spectrum as a school shooter, you need to have somebody interacting with that kid because as soon as you have a trained person interacting with them, they're going to be like, hey, wait a minute, this kid doesn't answer questions the way that usual 15-year-olds do,
Exactly.
14-year-olds do. He's not talking about, the parties he's going to. He's not talking about the girls he likes or the boys he likes. He's not doing the things that every other single student that I've talked to in this school is doing. He is on a different course and he's on a course that's not good. When he's walking around, he's looking at his feet. He's, you know,
Yep.
drawing pictures of just pure blackness on papers. He doesn't want to speak. He doesn't want to speak in class. He curses at his teachers. He's, but whatever. I mean, you could come up with a billion different things probably, but there has to be people dedicated to looking at the students on a consistent basis and say, hey, I knew this kid in the second grade, in the third grade, in the fourth grade, but now that he's in the fifth grade, he's a different kid than he was a year ago. We need to talk to his parents. We need to talk to him. What's going on with you? Why are you suddenly feeling this way about these things? And I think if you had that, that would give you the opportunity to maybe stop some of these school shootings because you would have an idea about who the students were and what they were going through. And I think spending money on that in the public educational system would be so much more valuable than the things that we currently are spending all kinds of money. I mean, you don't need to have one administrator per three students, but it would sure as hell help to have one qualified mental health
Yep.
professional at a school per every 25 students.
Yep. Oh,
So,
absolutely. Well, again, it goes back to being proactive versus reactive because invariably what happens in most of these cases with the shooter is all the stuff you just described come out. People say, "Oh, yeah, you should have seen his social media posts here and there, and this interaction I had with them back when 2 years ago or whatever." And so ultimately, it does come out. It's usually after the fact is the problem,
yeah,
and that's where just yeah, again, put it in gross terms of just finances and stuff like that, we would be so much money ahead from a funding perspective if we would just solve these problems. Just imagine what this poor school is going through right now in Georgia,
yeah,
and what it's going to do to them, obviously, just from the emotional and social
yeah,
craziness that's got to be going on there and the desperation people are feeling. But even if you can't put your head around that, just it's going to be expensive.
yeah,
I mean, it is going to be so expensive to do with that. So just putting that money ahead of time, I mean, we'd be paying a fraction of the cost if you could work on identifying these kids beforehand.
yeah. And I think it would just be, I mean, again, school should be about, you know, bringing kids along to be the best that they can be.
Yep.
And I think one of the things that they do wrong in school all the time is that they try and teach too many things that you don't really need to know. And they don't concentrate enough on making you a better human being. And I think if we concentrated mostly on mathematics and English, which are huge,
Yeah.
made most of everything else an elective, which people could take, but make sure that people are at grade level in those two things, in
Yep.
mathematics and English, then you could have teachers and professionals on the campus whose job it is essentially to make sure that people are becoming productive and quality members of society. You
Right.
know, well-adjusted, happy people are productive people, are successful people. Maladjusted, unhappy, desperate people,
Yeah.
are not going to be productive because they're unhappy.
Yeah. And so much of that starts in our youth. I mean, how
Absolutely.
many how many times do we have to learn this lesson that is, I mean, I don't know what the statistics are, but it's something like you learn 80% of what you're going to know from kind of that visceral, in your bones understanding of what's right and
Hmm.
wrong and all that. 80% of that you learn by the time you're whatever, 6 or 7 years old, right?
Yeah.
That's just that part, let alone the fact of the communication abilities and things like that, and making sure, to your point, that people feeling secure and people are hearing them and seeing them,
Hmm.
because there is not one model that fits all. And
Right.
we're trying to create some of these models. I just hate that word models because each one of us has a distinct DNA. So by definition, we're all different, right? That we don't have those listening posts to
Yeah.
really understand what kids are going through. And it's even, I mean, when we were growing up, I know everybody, it's a cliche now, but it was a simpler time.
Yeah.
And it is so much more complicated now with what goes on with social media and crap like that, that it is a very, very difficult time for kids growing up. I mean, I would hate to be growing up in right now.
Yeah, I agree with you on that one, but all the more reason to try and keep it simple in school.
Yep,
Have simple, attainable goals, that really will be of benefit to people knowing how to do mathematics, speaking good English, writing good English, English comprehension, all those things that we need to be to function, to communicate with each other, to have an understanding
yep,
of each other. Focus on that. Make sure the kids are doing well. Make sure that people aren't getting left behind or feeling, isolated or, objectified or put upon or bullied or any of those other things. Have people in place to do those. And then, if somebody's really interested in, LGBTQ studies, they can have an
right,
elective for that. And
right,
another person who's interested in, I don't know, basketball can have an elective for basketball
right,
or whatever it is that you want to come up with that you want to do.
right.
But if you can keep the kids well adjusted, if you can get them to learn mathematics and English,
Well,
good to
that's the
go.
basis for everything else you
Right.
want to venture into,
Right.
right?
And if you want to
And
get a job right out of high school, you're gonna
awesome.
get an internship. You're gonna learn how to do that job. People who actually know how to do the job are gonna teach you. Great, learn those skills. If you really want like a liberal arts education, hey, fine, go to liberal arts college, get your liberal arts degree. But we should be able to get people through high school at 12th grade reading level, at 12th grade mathematics level, and not shooting each other.
That would be a huge success, right?
Right. That would
If we
be
got the,
great. Let's do that.
let's do that. And then after high school, or when you're getting ready to graduate, you've got a lot of time to figure out if you want to really focus on X. And that's not to say you have to wait till then,
Right.
but there's a ton of time because reality is, and I don't know how it was with you even during college, but I learned more at the time I was in the journalism world because I worked summer times at a newspaper, and I learned more in those 2 or 3 months when I was, working and actually doing the job
Yeah.
compared to what I learned during the 4 years of college. It's not to say they all, they have different benefits and all that kind of stuff, but there's time. But if you don't have the kind of the fundamental emotional stability and, just basic core skills of, being able to read and write and do a little bit of math, it's going to be tough no matter what you do.
Yeah. And I
So
actually like what you said earlier too about the fact that, sometimes things take more time for different people for
absolutely.
different reasons. And I think that's fine too. I mean, like my wife and I both went back to graduate school in our 30s.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's an option for people to do too, and also follow up on the idea of how you learn different things. When I specifically, when I decided to go back to graduate school, I decided that I was going to go to a school that would teach me a trade. Now my trade happened to
Yes.
be physical therapy,
Yeah.
and I chose the school that I thought was best suited to that, which was USC, because they had such great opportunities for clinical instruction. So while you're at SC, yeah, you were in the class and you were learning things and you were doing your textbook work and all that stuff. But where it really paid off was USC is so connected to every clinic everywhere that you had great opportunities,
Yeah.
and every year, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 12 weeks, all this time that you're spending in clinics, actually, meeting patients, working with people who are actually practicing, learning how to actually do the job. So that
Right.
by the time you graduated, I mean, you'd already done the job by the time you graduated. You'd
Yeah.
been in every clinic you were ever going to need to be in, done everything you ever were going to do. You were already doing the job by the time you graduated. And
Yeah.
so
Oh
I
yeah.
just think that was great. And you could apply that same model to high school and say, look, there's
Absolutely.
gazillions of opportunities. If you really want to go to Harvard, then these are the things that you need to take, and this is what you need to do, and this is what you need to do. But if
Yeah.
you want to be an electrician, because God
Yeah.
knows we need more electricians, then our school is going to connect you with people in the trades, and they're going to start teaching you how to be an electrician right now. And when you walk out of this school, you're going to have some sort of certificate from some sort of training program that says that you're an apprentice electrician, and
Yep.
you're going to get hired, and you're going to learn, be an apprentice for another year or two, and then you're going to be an electrician.
Well, and the irony of that is it's kind of going back to the future, right? Because
Right.
my dad was an electrician and
Hmm.
that's how it happened. You would go through your minimum level of just general education, but it was all about that apprenticeship. And that doesn't just apply to the trades. I mean, I think it applies to almost any job there is. I mean,
Yeah.
with physical therapy, it's the same way. With mine, when I was in journalism, same thing. It's like that's where you really got it. At least I did.
Yeah.
That's when the light bulb really came on.
Yeah. But as I say, when we fail young students and we fail to teach them basic mathematics and we fail to teach them basic English skills, comprehension, writing, whatever, and give them no opportunities to expand their horizons as far as, what are the available things that are out there? What could I be doing? What's interesting to me? Having interactions with people. That's just a massive failure on the part of the educational system. And it's unacceptable. We shouldn't be accepting that at all.
Right. And again, this is a perfect example of this is not a right or left issue, a progressive
Not
conservative
at
issue.
all.
This is a human issue. This is just, again, common sense. This is if we really, and I think most people generally agree we want to progress, right?
Right.
We want to get better at whatever we're, as a society. This shouldn't be a controversy. It should
No.
be, the 90% of us, there's always strange people on either side. The vast majority of people, I mean, how can you argue against that? It's like arguing against trying to find a cure for cancer. It's just
Yeah,
like
it's crazy. It's
it's
crazy.
it's a silly argument,
Yeah.
and
But
it's
again, just to bring it back to the third party idea, and because
yep,
we are in fact Californians, if you can't move some of these Democrats out of office, if you can't break the hammerlock they have on everything, there is going to be no interest anywhere. Because I mean, let's face it, the public schools are a government entity. The only
right,
way to change the public schools is to go through the government. But if you always reelect the same people to keep doing the same thing, and there's never any new ideas, never any different opinions, and even worse than that, it's actually in the best interest of the politicians to maintain the status quo so they can continue to get the funding and they can continue to get the backing and they can continue to get all the things that they're already
yep,
winning with. Until you can break that cycle,
yep.
you're never going to do anything about the schools. And you can bitch and moan all you want about school shootings or how bad things are or how we wish we could change this or that. You will never, ever change anything unless we change our politics.
That's right. Again, that's comes back to the incentive. Those things rewarded get done, and
Right.
we are rewarding politicians to maintain the status quo.
Exactly.
And
Yep.
the only way we can change that is to change the political system, hence third party
Third
and
parties.
and other ways. I mean, just people
Yeah.
getting more active. Period.
Yeah. Well, a lot of it is really, and again, it's why I'm always so grateful that to have this opportunity to do this podcast. Um, it starts with communication, and again,
Absolutely.
we don't have the largest audience of any two
No.
podcasters out there, so I mean that's true. But again, people just need to
Sorry.
speak up a little bit. Just try and say, hey, look, we just can't keep doing these same things all the time.
Right.
And even if people were just starting to speak up more about independent candidates and about third party politics
Yep.
and those kind of things, if people started to know a few people that were also interested in that thing and there started to be a little bit more of a community about, the potential of a viable third party, then it wouldn't feel like, oh, I'm just throwing my vote away kind of thing, because you'd be like, you know what, there's a ton of people out there that feel the same way I do about these things. And, it's just a matter of us coalescing.
Yep.
And then, then you've really got something. So like, again, speak up. We've got to get past all the legacy media
Yes.
nonsense
Yep.
and, just try and start a movement,
Yep.
that
Exactly.
hopefully will
Well,
somewhere.
I'll wrap it up with one of my heroes, Harry Chapin, the singer-songwriter.
Hmm.
His credo was, "When in doubt, do something." And
Yeah.
I think that's what we're doing.
Yep.
That's how he kind of ended every concert. When in doubt, do something, because he was really a proponent. He had friends on all sides of the political spectrum and all that kind of stuff. And it's like, you just got to get in there and don't expect somebody else to solve the problem. You got to step up and start talking about it and trying to figure a way out of the mess.
Yep. And my philosophy in life has always been if you're not willing to at least try a little bit, then you
Yeah,
have no right to complain.
that's right.
Just suck it up. If you're not going to try and do anything, even just a little, then just shut up.
Yep. You're here. We agree on that one too. All right, man. That was good. I love it when we're never really sure where things are going to go, but I'm really glad we spent some time on the whole school situation, because
Yeah,
I think that's a really key thing we need to focus on as a society, because everything comes back to that beginning when we all start off in life.
yeah. And I just say one last thing before we go, and that is really that, my condolences to those families. My heart
Oh,
goes out.
absolutely.
It's a tragedy. I mean, there's no words, but I
No,
mean, all you can say
can't
is
imagine.
just you wish them the best from here on.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. We'll wrap it up there, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Sounds good. See you soon.
Bye.